Over the last couple of years I've reviewed quite a few different small HD cameras, most of which come in at about £50 or less, but if you want a proper HD action camera with an LCD screen on it, you're going to have to pay quite a bit more for that. For example, a Contour Plus camera costs about £500, but that does let you output the screen onto an iPhone or an iPod Touch. A GoPro HD Hero camera is about £250, and the backpack for that is a further £90. You can get an ATC 9K camera for about £250, but the best price one I've seen is the Drift HD, which comes in at about £165. Well, I've managed to find a cheaper alternative to all those. It's this model. It's called the Extreme Cam, and it's a full 1080p HD action camera. It cost £122 delivered to the UK from China. It came from Chinavasion.com, and for some reason they like to call it the Crocolis HD. I don't know how they come up with these names, but I'm going to just call it the Extreme Cam. Let's just have a look at the specifications to see what you get for the money. Well, I'll scroll past these quickly first of all, so if you do want to look at these in detail you'll have to pause the video now, but I will focus in on a couple of the more important ones to me. The video resolution, you can record at 1920 by 1080 at 30 or 25 frames a second, or 720p at 60, 30 or 25 frames a second, and depending on the resolution you're using, the lens will either be a 142 degree for 1080p or a 172 degree lens for 720p. That's quite wide. Now it is waterproof. It's IP68, which apparently the IP code, which I've just learnt about, the 6 means that it stops dust getting inside, and the 8 means that you can immerse it underwater at least a metre, probably more. We'll have a look what you get inside the box, and I'll just warn any impatient people that the first time you'll get to see video from the camera will be at about the 6.5 minute mark, so you might want to fast forward to that if you don't want to see all the different accessories. But for those that do, here they are. Well, first off, there's this kind of metal clamp thing, and the idea with this is the camera slides inside it. It's got a rubber coating on the inside to stop your camera getting scratched, and then you put this rubber band across the top to stop the camera falling out. I've got to be honest, it's pretty stiff anyway. I don't think it would fall out, but you know, it's belt and braces approach. And then you put this rubber strap through the back if you want, through those slots there, or you can put a Velcro strap, which is also supplied, and there's an arm one as well. Right, now this is a plastic clip which clips on the base of the camera and slides in with a very firm click and won't fall out easily. And again, you can put the rubber strap through that if you want, different orientations. And it's pretty hard to get off, but you can do it if you know the knack. Right, next thing is this, which is a car mount. It uses the same kind of plastic clip that goes on the bottom of the camera as the previous thing. So again, you put it into those slots on the bottom and slide it and it clicks in. And the idea is there you've got an articulated joint to put the camera attached to a car windscreen or a dashboard or something. The next thing is this. It's a metal bracket designed for putting the camera on a set of handlebars. It's quite a heavy device. Underneath that rubber bit there, it's all metal. There's no kind of, I thought it might be dampened or spring-loaded or something, but it's not. It's an all-metal clamp. And it's very firm and solid again, as you'd imagine, being metal. And it's good that it's got this tripod hole in the bottom, because that means you can put anything on it. Oh, by the way, here are some sort of 3M sort of double-sided sponge sticky things which you could put on that plastic clip on the bottom to attach it to other devices. There's an adapter, of course, with a USB plug on the back. It charges through USB. It also comes with a USB A to mini B lead, an HDMI mini to full size, which goes in the back of the camera into the HDMI hole there behind the little flap. You've got a video out for standard definition if you wanted to plug it into your telly that way. Probably not recommended. I'd stick to HDMI if you can. A car charger adapter thing, you can charge and record at the same time. And this is a good one, a microphone. It's got an external mic in on the back, which plugs into the mic in hole on the back there. Right, now let's have a look at the camera itself. Well, I think it's a very professional looking device. If you told me it was something that the BBC used, I'd believe you. It's very solidly put together. We'll just have a look at the bottom of it here. At the back there is a speaker, and at the front is a tiny microphone hole, and in the middle is a tripod screw mount, and that screw at the front, I've got no idea what that is at all. I opened it up and there was nothing behind it. Now on the top here you've got the 3 main buttons, photo, power and video start stop at the front, and 4 buttons at the back here below the LCD screen. It's got this clip on the top which holds the back on firmly to stop water getting inside. It's quite easy to unclip, but it's a very good firm clip. Right, now let's have a look in the back here. Top left, we've got TV out, mic in, a little LED in the middle there that says charge. At the bottom here, the memory card is a full-size SD card, then the HDMI slot, and then the USB one. The battery that comes out here is a proper battery. You can get replacements for these. 2 hours 25 minutes battery life with 1080p and the LCD on, from my tests anyway. So you could, I suppose, get more of those batteries and charge them outside the camera and swap them over if you were going to do a lot of filming, which is a nice feature. And as I mentioned, this back door, when you put it together, it forms a watertight fit. I haven't tested it underwater, but I do believe that it would work properly. Right, let's switch it on and just have a look. You get some LEDs at the bottom of the screen there as well. And if you look at what you can see on the screen here, at the top left there, it tells you what mode you're in, 720p 60, and how long you've been recording for, battery life, things like that. Finally, it's time to get outside and show you some footage from the camera. So here I am in Manchester on my lunch hour, and let's have a look at what the camera sees. Well, here it is. Now this is a 720p mode, and it's pin sharp and it's got brilliant colours on it. I'm just hoping this comes across properly on YouTube. Now in my pocket I also had the Sanyo PD1 camera. So what I did was I stood on a spot and panned across to the right and then back to the left with the Sanyo PD1, which has a pretty normal field of view, and then did the exact same thing with the Extreme Cam. And as you can see, there's a massive difference between the two cameras in the amount that you can see. That fisheye lens really does make an awful lot of difference. And I quite like the fisheye effect. Maybe not everyone does, but I think it's quite entertaining. Right, now I'm stood across from the Woosang supermarket. I like standing here because the Woosang supermarket's got a lot of detail on the front of it and nice colours, as you can see. So here I am stood with my Sanyo pocket camera again, and we'll just have a quick, is it a pan when you go up and down? No, it's something else. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Or is it a tilt? Or no, not too sure. Something like that. Anyway, I'll have to look it up on Wikipedia later. Right, now here we go with the Extreme Cam, stood on the same spot. As you can see here, we get the full building in on this angle, which is great. Okay, now let's just pop inside the supermarket, because I want to show you how the fisheye lens looks when you sort of close up to things, because it does give you this kind of weird effect. I'm sure there's like a Jane's Addiction video that looks like this. It also kind of looks a little bit like a predator's eye view of a supermarket. Actually, I should point out that I'm not a predator, by the way. Although this woman was never seen again. Right, here's some trams. You've always got to show trams when you're in Manchester to make it look cosmopolitan and exciting. All the footage that you're watching at the moment was recorded at 720p at 60 frames a second, which is incredibly smooth when I play it back on my home equipment, but on YouTube, of course, it knocks it down to 30 frames a second. Now, I wasn't aiming it at anything, which is my defence for filming that woman's bottom just then, if the police ask. I was just holding it down by my side and pointing it forwards as I was walking. And the good thing with the big fisheye lens is that you get to see everything in front of you. Now, here I am stood on a platform waiting for a train to come in. As you can see, everything is pin sharp from one edge right across to the other. There's no out of focus bits at all. It's lovely and clear, and it's as good as my other HD camera, my proper Sony one that I filmed the rest of the reviews with. At least on a nice bright day like this it is. Now let's just look at the difference between 1080p and 720p aspect ratio. So 1080p here, look at the big wheel, and flip to 720p, and that's how much more you can see in 720p mode when you stood on the same spot. That's the difference between the different fisheye lens orientations. Right, I'm sorry about this, but the fun's over. We've got to look at the menus inside the camera. Now, these are all controlled with these 4 buttons below the LCD screen. You press the left-hand one to get into the menus. The first press gets you into the movies, so there you can look at the movies that you've recorded earlier on. Press it again, you get into the photo mode, and the third press gets it into the setup. Now, we'll look at the resolution options first. You've got 720p 60, which is the first one here, and then 720p 50, 720p 30, 720p 25, WVGA 60, 50, 30, Full HD, which is 1080p 30, and 1080p 25. All of these work perfectly, and there isn't a single drop frame in any of the modes. Right, we'll look at the overwrite, record overwrite. This is if you want to loop the video round and round when the card gets full. And you can record in 2-minute, 5-minute or 15-minute segments. You can set the time within the camera quite easily again using these buttons. It's obviously just like setting a digital watch. Size is the size of the photos. You've got 5, 8 or 3 megapixel. It's a 5 megapixel sensor, so just leave it in 5. Right, quality you can have high, medium and low, which obviously you leave it on high. TV type is what type TV you're going to be using. Of course in the UK it's PAL, so I'll leave it on that. You can turn these beep sounds on or off if they annoy you. I quite like them, so I'm leaving them on. You can have the camera auto power down after a certain amount of time. You can have the LCD screen turn off after a certain amount of time too, and that could be useful in saving battery life or making it more discreet if you're going to leave it recording for a while. You can format the memory card inside the camera, and you can change the settings back to default if you want. The flicker is depending on the hertz of the lights in the country you're in, so it doesn't look flickery when you're filming indoors. You can turn the timestamp on or off. You can have just the date, the date and the time on there, or just nothing at all, very easily. Auto capture, this is one I nearly missed out on completely, thinking it was nothing. I'll show you that later because it's actually a very important feature. You can go into the contrast, you can change that between standard, hard and soft. You'll notice some of these menus look very familiar with the look very similar to the KGB spy camera menus that I was using recently, and I think the camera's made by the same people. It's a very, unless they've just nicked the operating system from each other. You can change all the different settings for the sort of white balance and exposure. I haven't really messed with these. I've left everything on automatic or sort of dead center for all the videos I've been doing. And there's the firmware version. Now I'll just finish off this rather dull but necessary section by showing you what the camera looks like when it's plugged into an HDMI port on a television. And here it is. It's the same but larger, rather obviously. Now I'm not going to go through all the menus again and drive you mad, but I'll just show you that you can play back the footage that you've recorded on your television, of course, and while it's doing that it never stutters or jerks at all. It's really fast going into and out of the menus and it plays back smoothly. Now that means that this camera must be incredibly powerful because it's playing back 1080p 30 frames a second footage without a stutter, and that requires quite a bit of horsepower. One thing, it's rather fiddly to operate the camera when it's attached to the television because you've got to press these buttons with your thumb whilst having the door open for the HDMI cable. So it's not exactly ideal. It'd be quite good if they had a remote control for it. Right, I think it's time to try and wake everyone up again and take the camera back outside and use it for some more extreme type footage. Well, sort of extreme. I'm not the kind of surfer dude, skydiving kind of guy, but if I was I could attach it to my head using the rubber band and do something incredibly ridiculous, but I'm not that kind of person. Now I could attach it to a motorcycle helmet using one of the different mounts that came with it. As you can see here looking at this, it's quite large but it's not ridiculous, but if you put it on the top it might look a little bit stupid. It doesn't weigh too much, it's 193 grams, but what I decided to do with it was attach it to the side window of my car and take some footage that way. I was going to flip the footage over afterwards and use it in the video, but unfortunately that mount for the window conducts a lot of vibration, as you can see here. In fact, the footage wasn't usable. So what I did is I went back and put the camera on the back shelf instead. So let's have a look at that footage. So I think the answer to that is no, you can't really hear it on the soundtrack. And the reason I was doing that is I'm going to go around the route again and record with the external microphone plugged into the back next time. But also I'm going to go around at 720p. So have a look at what you can see on the screen now, because in a second it changes to 720p. And there you go. So you can see an awful lot more, as you can tell. You can see the top of the windscreen and all of the front of the car. Right, now this time round I've got the external microphone plugged in, it's attached to my shirt, and hopefully you can hear my voice a little bit clearer than you could last time. Or maybe it's exactly the same, I won't really find out until I get back home again. Hopefully the wind noise I'll just finish off this segment by showing you again the difference between the 720p and the 1080p. So we're looking at 1080p now, and then we'll flip across, that's 720p there. And you might be forgiven for thinking it's actually sharper than the 1080p, but what we'll do, we'll zoom in on the exact same section on both clips, so that's 720p zoomed in there, and look at the radio, and we'll move across to 1080p, and you can see that it's a lot sharper in reality. It's just because the 720p zoomed out it looks sharper sometimes. And I was very lucky whilst I was out in Manchester just doing some tests with different bit rates with this camera to happen across these lovely skateboarding gentlemen. And they were kind enough to let me film some of their extreme skateboarding activities, which is just the thing that this camera is designed for. So let's have a look at some of that. Yeah, so many thanks for letting me do that, chaps. I never did get your names. Right, these were the tests that I was doing at the time. I was trying to see how the different resolutions affected the bitrate. So at full 1080p 30 frames a second, it's running at 7.45 megabits a second. At 25 frames a second, it's 7.83 megabits a second. At 60 frames a second 720p, it's 7.83 megabits a second. At 50 frames a second, it's 7.80. And at 30 frames a second it's 5.66. Oh, and finally at 25 frames a second it's 5.62. Now I've got to apologise if all that meant nothing at all to you, but there are people out there who are interested in that kind of thing, and that's for them. Right, now I've got to show you this. This is really quite impressive. It does do time-lapse photography. Now hopefully you know what time-lapse is, but I'm going to demonstrate it anyway. Buried right down at the bottom of the menus, there's an option which I mentioned earlier on, which I nearly ignored, called auto capture. Now if you select this, it lets you take a photo at different intervals. You can choose between every 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or not at all. So I'm going to set it to 3 seconds in this demonstration. I'm inside my garage now, and there you go. It takes a photo automatically, a full photo using whatever resolution you've got it set to, whether it's 5 megapixel or 3 megapixel, at the intervals that you specify, and it'll keep doing that until the battery is flat. So the idea is that you get the camera and attach it to something like a tripod that holds it nice and steady, and point it at something where the action changes gradually, and then speed it up by using the pictures you've took, making them into a movie that runs at 30 frames a second. So for example, here are the pictures that my camera took. A big folder full of JPEGs, all 3 megapixel. I set it to the low resolution to make it easier. I then put it into this program, which is called Time-Lapse Assembler. It's a free piece of software for the Mac, but it worked fine. I don't know why I'd bother paying for anything. So I made a 30 frames a second movie, and here it is. So this is about 2.5 hours compressed into maybe 20 seconds. I could have probably done with spacing the photos closer together so you could have seen a more gradual movement, because it all looks a little bit random. But for a first attempt at time-lapse photography, I think it's really quite impressive. I'm very happy with it. Now I still haven't yet found the perfect camera, and this one's no exception, although it gets a lot closer than most. I'll just lay out some of its faults for you. I'll demonstrate this first off with my Sony camcorder. This is a low light condition. I'm just panning around the garage now and filming the bike that's hanging up there, which never gets ridden. Right, now I'm using the Extreme camera, same time of day, just panning around, same lighting conditions, and I'm going to point it at the bicycle, and it's not there. It's not very good in low light conditions. It's also not particularly quick at converting between low light and bright. As you can see here, if I'm panning from one to the other, it takes a couple of seconds for the iris to catch up. I mean, this is pretty standard stuff for cameras like this, but it really does favour a nice bright clear day. I mentioned before that I really do like the design of the camera. It's very easy to operate and you can press those buttons without looking at it and know exactly what you're doing. But there is one slight design flaw, and it's this. It's the screen. It folds down, which is fine, but wouldn't it be better if it folded upwards like this? That way you could see what you were filming and you could hold the camera at a low level and maybe film people like those skateboarders and still keep everything in shot. Now, of course, you could film like this and flip all your footage in post-production editing, but it's really something that I'd rather not have to bother doing. And a couple of other little moans. If you plug in a microphone to that mic hole on the back, which is a standard 3.5mm jack by the way, unfortunately you've got to have that back door open, which means it's not going to be waterproof. And then the other thing, that charge light in the middle there, it never goes out, so you don't know when you finish charging the camera. So I've been charging it for about 2 hours and then pulling the plug, but I don't know if that's perfect. And then finally, the microphone. It's pretty bad. I'll demonstrate that now. Okay, so let's test out the sensitivity of the microphone hole on the bottom here. What I'm going to do first off, I'm going to plug in the external microphone into the socket on the back here. And the microphone's on my shirt now, so if I just stand here and the camera is set to record, so we better test the volume. So here I am testing 1, 2, 3. Now I'm going to pull out the microphone, and now it's recording from the built-in microphone hole which is just there. And as I'm sure you can tell, the sound quality is really rather poor. So if it's at all possible, I'd recommend dubbing over the sound from the camera with something a little bit more palatable. There's one feature when I'm doing my action camera reviews that I tend to skip past, and that's the photo mode, because usually on these action cameras the photos are rather poor, but on the contrary this camera takes rather good photos. These are all taken in the 5-megapixel mode, and although they do have that kind of fisheye effect to them, they're all really rather acceptable. In fact, when I went past this Scarecrow festival in the car, the only camera that I had on me was the Extreme, so I stepped out and took some photos with it, and I'm quite happy with the results. And in fact, I wouldn't be ashamed of putting any of them into my photo library. Right, well done to those of you that have made it this far. You're now at the summary, so I'll summarise what I've learnt about the Extreme Cam. Well, this is an excellent camera. It takes pin-sharp 1080p video at 30 frames a second, or smooth as silk 720p video at 60 frames a second, never drops a frame. It has that beautiful wide-angle lens on the front, which is sharp from one edge to the other. The camera is very well put together and it's intuitive to use. It might cost a bit more, but it's the best action camera that I've bought so far. Now, I know that fisheye lenses aren't to everyone's taste, but I found this one to be really useful. It meant that whatever way I pointed the camera, I was always guaranteed to get something interesting in shot. And it meant that I didn't really have to look at that LCD screen in the end to frame the footage, although that screen is very useful for being able to go through the different menus whilst you're out and about and change the settings. And then, of course, on top of that, you've got all those different fixtures and fittings that came inside the box for attaching the camera to different things. And if you can't understand the menu structure on the camera, then maybe you shouldn't be using it, because if you can't understand this, you're some kind of moron. And of course, we shouldn't forget that excellent and unexpected time-lapse function, which I know I'm going to have a lot of fun playing around with. The only thing that lets this camera down is the poor sound quality, whether through the built-in microphone hole or via the external microphone input. It uses a very low bit rate. So as long as you can live with poor sound quality, which I can, then this might be the Extreme camera for you. Now, if you want to get hold of one of these cameras, there's a direct link to the product on ChinaVasion.com in the YouTube video description. But also there's a little bit more information on my blog at Techmoan.com. But all that remains now is for me to say thanks for watching.